in the beautiful city of Montreal. As you can see, we have a very intimate participation this morning. Of course, Engagement Day, we have workshops that are going on throughout the building, and we're delighted to have you here for the Engagement Day discussions with industry. Engagement Day is a setting for interactive and two-way communications with industry, with academia, with research, and of course, ICAO member states. We've been fortunate to have a very informative, interactive session over the past 2 days, and I think we've all learned a lot. And one of the themes that came out quite often was cooperation, collaboration between ICAO member states and industry in general, and of course academia and research areas. So on that theme, we will build today's Engagement Day with industry. The format will be similar to, yes, if you could turn off your cell phones, please. The format will be similar to yesterday and Wednesday. Business as usual then for asking questions through the ICAO app and the polling and so on, because that was very effective. And I think by yesterday afternoon, we were developing a real sense of comfort with the process. So we really hope that you will be joining in and participating today with the questions mostly, and some of the moderators will be asking for your advice and your comments on the polling segment. Again, I'd like to welcome our friends on the YouTube ICAO channel. It's nice to have everyone around the world really joining us for this symposium. We have a few thousand people that were following the event over the past few days. So it's very comforting to know that the message that you are listening here and taking part in is being transmitted all over the world. I now have the great pleasure of introducing our speaker for the opening remarks this morning. They will be made by Sonia Ifdi. She is the head of the Security Measures Office at the Directorate General for Civil Aviation of France. A few words about Sonia. She began her career as head of the Explosives Detection Unit within the French Civil Aviation Technical Center in 2004. After 5 years, she moved to the Office of Security Measures to manage security policy for air carriers. For 3 years, she headed the Office of Security Measures with the aim of defining the national AVSEC policy. Her goal was to coordinate the main departments within the French government in charge of aviation security. Since January 2019, she is in charge of defining AVSEC guidelines and implementation within the French Oversight Authority of France. Between 2013 and 2019, she was the chair of the ECAC Guidance Material Task Force, and since 2011, has been the French representative to the ICAO Aviation Security Panel and the co-rapporteur of the ICAO Working Group in Innovation in Aviation Security. She is the current chair of the ICAO Aviation Security Panel. So without further ado, Sonia, it's a delight always to have you here at ICAO. Merci.
Merci Denis. Bonjour à tous. Thanks to the magic of the ICAO interpreters back in the room, I will make the opening speech in French. So it's just for you to have the time to take your headphones, and I will switch in French. Donc je tiens tout d'abord.
First of all, I would like to thank ICAO for the invitation to open up the session today, the Industry Engagement Day, dealing with innovation in security. Now, of course, I will not try to define security based on Wikipedia or any other source, but when preparing for this, I was aware of the fact that certain terms are very important when we're talking about innovation. What are these key terms? We've got incremental innovation, deep learning, automation. We've got free innovation, being responsive, artificial intelligence, and I'll leave it there. So, in 10 minutes, it would be impossible to try and define these terms and others. So either needed to have taken ask for more time, but now I think you've been able to fill out your bingo form with the innovation terms. And so perhaps we'll be able to go on to other things. Now I'm going to try and wake you up because we haven't got too much coffee coursing through our veins. Now, as you know, I always like to joke, but behind these jokes, there are, of course, real concepts behind each of these words, and one should not stand in for another. Today, you will have experts throughout the day who will use these terms and place them in the right context for you, so we can see the contribution of each of these terms within the area of aviation security. Of course, some of these speakers are much more competent than me on certain topics, and then I will come back to speak on a personal note this afternoon. Now, if you're following the debates online, it's because you're already convinced that we need to do something looking ahead to the increase in aviation traffic, and we want to ensure safety and security. And we're not going to talk about what's actually the top priority or whether it's the two together, the two in parallel. But it's necessary for us to reinvent the way that we do our work. But why? We've already got trained staff who have been trained correctly, and we've already worked on the security culture. We've also got robust procedures in place, so we are efficient and effective, and we're already using technology with a proven track record. So our current model works. As a regulator, I could rest on my laurels. But in the room, we can see now we're going to take time to think about all this, but not just to reflect on all this. We need to go further. Every day, I'm sure that when you take an airplane, or perhaps not on a daily basis, but when you take the plane, perhaps you complain about the procedures. Often they're seen as a constraint by aviation users. Constraints in the widest sense of the word, and that's how it's felt by passengers and companies. And this is understandable because security is one of the last processes before you actually get up in the air and fly the airplane. We were an add-on once air transport had already started. And each time that you add in an industrial process and graft it on something that already exists, you have to always ensure that it's going to be efficient before it's integrated into the existing system. And all of this is not yet at an optimal situation, and things may actually worsen, and it may actually put a brake on air traffic growth. So why should we continue to protect aviation? We could get into a debate to see whether we should stop doing security. Now, as a regulator, I would say no to that. I think it would be complicated to stop doing this. But why are we doing this? Protecting aviation is even more essential today than yesterday. We might have thought that a security measure was a temporary measure while we're waiting to see what's going to happen with threats, or whether they're going to go down or disappear. But today, 20 years and a day after certain attacks such as the ET-67, protection of aviation is definitely an objective. We need to continue with what we're doing. But one of the other problems, and that's why we're here, is because security is a shared responsibility throughout the world. It's not one sole actor who can find the solution. We're all interlinked, interrelated. We have to find a common solution and try and come up with a common vision, even though we have different businesses and different objectives. That is really what is at stake. I hope we're going to have a debate on these different issues, create a better understanding, and try and meet the challenges that we have to face alone and together. Innovation opens us up to change so that we can adapt and evolve. And of course, it can be rather frightening. We have to overcome this resistance to change. We've got something that's working, and if we change parameters, we're afraid that things will not work anymore. In particular, when we are, for example, a state regulator, we have to promote innovation and foster new ideas and have new entrants onto the market. But at the same time, we have to ensure that whatever we do, we have to mitigate and diminish risks on a daily basis. We can't put it off for another 10 years to come. We have to do it right now. If you have followed the debates over the last 2 days, you will have seen that these are two opposing ideas, and we have to continually dance between one and the other. So I have high expectations for this day today because we can bring together these different visions, and I hope that this will nourish the debates that are going to take place within the famous AVSEC panel that I'm fortunate enough to chair. And I hope also that I'll be able to draw on our discussions today and the different viewpoints that we've shared from states and also from industry so that this can feed into the upcoming debates that are going to be extremely interesting, no doubt. So I'd like to wish you all a very pleasant day, and I'll give you back into the expert hands of Denis now. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Sonia, pour cette entrée.
Thank you, Sonia, for this introduction. And we'll be happy to see you again this afternoon at 2:30 p.m. in session 3.
With us this afternoon for session 3 at 2:30. For the moment, we turn to session 1, Governments and Innovation. And in this first session, we will be looking at the role of governments in the development and implementation of new and innovative technologies in a rapidly changing security environment. Our moderator is Anne-Marie Pellerin, founder and managing partner of the consultancy firm LAMLA. Through her organization, Anne-Marie combines strategic thinking and technical know-how to advise senior executives on some of the most pressing challenges and opportunities in the aviation and security sectors. Having served as a senior executive in the U.S. Department of Homeland Security in both the U.S. and Europe, she is uniquely positioned to navigate U.S., European, and global regulatory environments and related trends. Anne-Marie, I invite you to the stage, you and your team, of course, of panels. And as we set up, I thought we would have some bells, whistles, drums, and music and flags, but we don't have that much time. So we'll just have you walk up here and take your seats. Anne-Marie, first seat here on my left, and then our panel. Okay, so just a quick reminder to our panel to hold the microphone very close to your mouth so that we can all hear your wise comments and our interpreters can translate your comments with accuracy and passion and enthusiasm. Okay, Anne-Marie, we're looking forward to a very stimulating session. The floor is yours.
Good morning. For those of you who have glanced at the program with only a photo of me under this morning's session, I would say welcome to the mystery panel. I have good news for you, though. You do not have to listen to me speak for an hour and a half. Rather, we have 4 outstanding panelists here today to speak about government and innovation. My name is Anne-Marie Pellerin, managing partner of LAMLA. This topic is near and dear to my heart. I started in the sector as the executive director of Checkpoint of the Future for the U.S. Transportation Security Administration. I saw many of the challenges for governments in working in an agile manner and coordinating deployment efforts in a complex organization. Now, working outside of government and with companies, airlines, airports, and even governments trying to deploy new and innovative solutions in this space, I see the challenges of waiting for the regulation to come. Better security is sadly often not a sufficient business case. Requirements have traditionally opened markets, but those demands must be filled by companies investing millions in technology development with no promise of return. R&D dollars help, but governments are becoming more and more active in spurring innovation through better communication platforms, support of an ever-growing number of trials to drive product iteration, and openness to requests for process enhancements, and hopefully, innovative procurement processes in the future. So today we're going to speak about some of these things with our rockstar lineup of panelists. We have with us today Nick Bianchini from the U.S. Transportation Security Administration, Monica from the Civil Aviation Authority of China, Sean Carey from Draeger, a producer of detection equipment in this space, and Daniel Suhami from ICAO's TCB branch, the Requirements Development and Procurement branch of ICAO. So the format of our panel this morning is going to be that Nick is going to give an overview of some of the technologies and processing enhancements that TSA is looking at as a government looking to spur innovation. Following that presentation, Monica will give an overview of kind of their focus within the Chinese Civil Aviation Authority for innovation and change for people, process, and technology. And then we'll turn to Draeger, who will give us a kind of an overview of what they do, as well as Daniel with ICAO. The goal is to really kind of spur conversation and have more of a dialogue format. So we look forward to the conversation and thank you for being present. Nick, why don't you come up and start your presentation?
Good morning. As Anne-Marie mentioned, my name is Nick Bianchini. I work with the Transportation Security Administration. I believe this is my second year of coming to the symposium, so thank you again for the opportunity. If you go to the first slide, please. Oh, I got a clicker. Okay, even better. Great. So briefly, I'm going to just give you some highlights, if you will, of some of the, I would say, international challenges that we're all dealing with. And then give you a highlight, if you will, of some of the activities the U.S. Are currently involved with. And then I think the reality is some of these solutions aren't necessarily unique to the U.S. I think there are opportunities to employ these solutions around the world. But first and foremost, the reality is the threat to civil aviation remains significant. Terrorists are focused on causing mass casualties. Their goal is to spread panic, fear, and significant economic damage. We've seen over the years of different techniques and tradecraft, if you will, to try to circumvent screening at airports around the world, whether it be threats placed on the body or in laptops or in other locations, cargo facilities. The reality is the threat is real. And the reality is that terrorists are continuing to do their homework. They're trying to understand the technologies, they're trying to understand the policies and the procedures, and trying to identify the holes in the process of the system. So working together and trying to develop, as mentioned earlier, an agile system, trying to develop solutions that can quickly respond to what are perceived to be truly credible threats is the objective. Many of you invest in technologies at each of your respective countries, and you're always plagued with the question, what to buy and when to buy it. And so some of the challenges, of course, is you make those investments, and some of those investments are very significant. When you look at the hardware and then the software with some anticipation of a life cycle that will last so many years, the hope is the technology will continue to grow, you will continue to evolve it, you'll be able to address emerging threats, and then as a system, it works to mitigate what you're concerned about. A little quick snapshot for TSA, if you will. Obviously, the operations of TSA, we have roughly 440 airports, roughly about 2,200 checkpoint lanes. We screen on average about 2.5 million passengers a day, 1.2 million checked bags a day, and 6.25 million carry-on items a day. And each day, we're maintaining and operating roughly about 14,500 screening technologies. And this includes checkpoints, checked baggage locations. So similar to you, we're trying to determine what to invest in and why. And hopefully, we're making the right decisions based on the information we have at hand, including working with manufacturers who have the insight, if you will, around the capabilities of their technology, working with the intelligence community to understand the threats at hand, and then having a full appreciation and understanding of the operations. And I'm sure many of you are dealing with the same challenges we are. The passenger loads are continuing to increase. There's this goal, aspiration to have laptops and liquids no longer removed from carry-on bags and left in carry-on bags. We also want to increase the efficiency while managing current staffing levels. And I'm sure many of you are dealing with limited checkpoints. We need solutions that can actually fit into the actual opportunity, the locations where we need to deploy these systems. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, you're dealing with an evolving adversary and their tactics and their threats. And so it's a lot to digest, and it's a lot to try to take on. So understanding as a community, working together, sharing best practices, and developing capability collectively is a real opportunity, in my opinion. This is a quick highlight of some of the gaps I would highlight for at least TSA. And I don't think, yet again, these are necessarily unique to TSA. I think these are kind of reoccurring themes for many aviation organizations. Obviously, having great effective technologies that perform primary screening is ideal, but you also need the tools for the resolution to be able to clearly localize and focus on what you consider to be the most dangerous situations, whether it be a possible suspect bag or an individual that may appear suspicious or items on the passenger that may be suspicious. Do we have the right tools to be able to resolve those alarms? I think most of you are aware TSA has shifted over the last 10 years to very much a more focused risk-based screening. We have pre-check. We have a new application that we call Flex, which is kind of a pre-check light. And then we have standard screening lanes. And trying to design and develop and employ screening operations that work around those different CONOPS is obviously very challenging. We've done a lot lately to put more emphasis on verifying passengers' identities, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. And then yet again, if we can build efficiency in the process, we understand at the end of the day there's a trade space. Security effectiveness is important, but we also have to maintain the operations. We have to maintain the respect of the passenger. We have to ensure we manage staffing levels. We also want to ensure that there's a market for industry. Manufacturers are taking risk and investing in research and development and working closely with manufacturers to hopefully develop solutions that they can sell obviously to the US, but also around the world would be ideal. One of the, I think, probably latest and greatest trends, if you will, with aviation, and it's not necessarily unique across the world, the concepts of deep learning or artificial intelligence. We know more and more manufacturers are realizing the opportunities of leveraging artificial intelligence. It's been used in many other fields, including the medical industry, with huge paybacks. The one challenge with deep learning and machine learning is you need information, you need data. And the great thing about checkpoints, there are thousands and thousands, if not millions and millions of data points. And being able to work with manufacturers to help them collect that information and refine algorithms to support better detection and lower false alarm ultimately really gets you to what we think to be the best value. And in my experience personally, it's probably the last 5 years, we're starting to see some real returns on investment, some significant drops in false alarms based on laboratory and field testing by leveraging deep learning and machine learning. Manufacturers themselves, I think they're starting to realize there are pockets of subject matter expertise around the world that do nothing but artificial intelligence, and they're building those connections with those partners, and ultimately we're seeing that translate into better performance in our operations. This is I would argue, kind of a newer concept, a new paradigm. This is considered what we call the Open Threat Assessment Platform, or OTAP. Most of you, I'm sure, who work with manufacturers, you're typically dealing with one entity who develops the platform, who develops the software, and then basically you have a working relationship with that manufacturer for the years to come. Obviously, your hope and wish is that that manufacturer continues to develop those algorithms, continues to improve the performance. As more priorities come down from policy and as you deal with what you consider to be emerging threats, the goal is that that technology, not necessarily the hardware, but the software will continue to evolve. TSA, roughly about 8 years ago, established a new program called OTAP. And the fundamental bottom line approach here is working more closely with what we consider to be third-party entities. It's a little bit of a shift of a paradigm because you're really working with the hardware of the manufacturer, but actually looking at other solutions specific to the software. If you can collect information from a platform, you can convert it to a standard image format. Now you can work with multiple entities who do nothing but algorithm development, who do nothing but software development, and then ultimately providing a line of demarcation, if you will, of actually bringing in multiple parties who can focus on specific elements of the algorithms. The goal here really one day is actually be able to send the information from multiple machines at the checkpoint to a central server, and then being able to apply a variety of algorithms to deal with current threats and to be ready to be able to bring in new algorithms to deal with emerging threats. And as you can imagine, some of the manufacturers who've been in the business for many years, they're still sorting through this concept. But some of the new and upcoming manufacturers, they're totally embracing this concept. And the relationships are starting to build, and we'll continue to push that, at least from TSA's standpoint, as a core requirement on all of our manufacturers to provide the means to collect information from these systems and then potentially provide it to third-party entities. Some of the new and upcoming concepts with OTAP is looking at the ideas of high definition. We call them AITs, they're called security scanners, they're called body scanners. There's many terms for it. We work closely with one of the core developers of the ProVision 1, which I'm sure some of you or most of you have used in your checkpoints, and that's Pacific Northwest Labs under the Department of Energy. They've designed an upgrade or a new, an improved model, if you will, looking at the same core hardware components. Most of the body scanners today operate in a very defined bandwidth, usually between 25 to 32, 60 to 70 gigahertz. It's a very limited bandwidth. And these new scanners that they're looking at have what we call wideband antennas. So we're looking at a much larger bandwidth, gives you significantly improvement in resolution. Of course, the reliance is you got to be able to crunch all that information and be able to make heads and tails of what that information is giving you, but ultimately it gives you an opportunity to significantly improve the performance of the systems compared to what we see today. As we talked again in open threat assessment platform, working with third-party entities, having the means to be able to more quickly react to emerging threats, to be able to overlay third-party algorithms onto platforms that generate standard image formats to ultimately develop a better solution for the system. One other area that I think most of us or at least some of us have been talking about is in the world of X-ray screening. So fundamentally, all X-ray machines out there, whether it's computed tomography or fixed X-ray systems, they tend to rely on two core parameters. There are many discriminators, if you will, that when they're actually interrogating a bag in an X-ray tunnel, they're looking for certain data points. But two core elements is what we call density, and effective atomic number is Z effectiveness. Those are two discriminators that many of the manufacturers will use to decide whether or not an item in an X-ray tunnel is actually a threat or a benign item. And it's been helpful and it's been supportive for many years as we've progressed to relying more on algorithms, but we know that there are many other discriminators out there that could potentially be employed. One technology that we're working with Stanford University on is a concept looking at differential phase contrast imaging. It's what we consider to be an index, which looks at a number of data points that actually you can collect off the contents of the bag, but it does open the doors. If, in fact, you can start looking at new discriminators, even including X-ray diffraction, that's where you really get the payback on higher detection and lower false alarm with your algorithms. Integrating that into either current platforms or next generation platforms, that's being closely looked at as well. But truly, looking at alternative signatures to give you more information and more insight about the contents of the bag, that would provide you the better performance at the end of the day, and hopefully achieving that very objective of achieving lower false alarms. There we go. This is what I mentioned earlier. This is a product that was, once again, being developed by Pacific Northwest Labs. It's a product that's being developed under the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate under a program called Screening at Speed. What you're seeing basically is a frame, if you will, in that center picture of a ProVision 1 system. And it gives us the opportunity to retrofit those systems with these new wideband antennas. So ideally, you're not going out and purchasing brand new body scanners, security scanners, AIT systems. You're able to retrofit systems at a much more manageable cost, and yet again see a significant improvement in performance. These require additional demand, if you will, on the processing side, but ultimately we're seeing some significant value with this. One of the things that TSA did recently is we actually initiated a competition. And the competition was through a website called Kaggle. And what we did was we put a prize of roughly $1.2 million out there. We created a set of what we call development images, a set of training images, and then we kept our own independent set. And we were able to collect something in the range of about between 500 and 800 algorithms through this competition. And what we found from this competition, it gave us a huge opportunity to start collecting new ideas, new concepts. The individuals who submitted these solutions weren't traditional X-ray or AIT manufacturers. These were individuals who were doing all different things in life. And so our goal, which is one of the value, I guess, from this experience, is we own 100% of those algorithms, which gives us the means to be able to go into those algorithms and tune those algorithms to better support our needs. So it's definitely a work in process, but it does provide us a huge opportunity going forward. Do you want to hit a little? No. Okay, great. So one of the things we're looking at. One of the things we're looking at is walk through AIT systems. The idea of individuals having to stop and assume a pose to be able to perform, to go through the screening process at the end of the day is very time consuming and requires a lot of instruction. You potentially get false alarms. So one of the things we're working with in the Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology Directorate is looking at new designs for the AIT system. And if we're able to capture and mimic, obviously the variations of individuals as they walk through such a design, which includes gate speed and as well as the speed of the individual actually progressing through the process, we're able to leverage that as kind of a next generation solution. TSA want to get away from the concept of individuals having to stop and assume a pose for any type of body scanner. And the idea is individuals will be able to progress through the screening process and actually get screened accordingly. Other technologies we're looking at are orthogonal solutions, where you can actually look at multiple sensors, if you will, working on a single function. If there's opportunities looking at infrared, looking at millimeter wave, and looking at other types of discriminators, you now can combine those different alternative solutions into a single system and really provide you an orthogonal solution. Yet again, you can see from the image there, the idea is to not have the individual stop to assume the pose. The idea is to have the individuals almost free-flowing and being able to go through the process without being encumbered in any way. Some of the other work, and I think some of you may be aware of it, ECAC, the European Civil Aviation Conference, recently established a new detection standard for vapor. And traditionally, aviation screening has been done in one arena, and that's explosive trace detection. And they're fundamentally detecting particles or small amounts of explosives that potentially could be left behind for an individual that was around explosives who have touched explosives. Vapor provides a whole new opportunity, if you will, to be able to detect explosive threat materials. Granted, there are ranges, if you will, of vapor pressure for various explosive materials, but there are certain explosive materials that have a very high vapor pressure, which provides a lot of opportunity for alternative vapor sensors. There are a few products that have been available in the market, but fundamentally the question is how low do you need to go? Meaning that when you actually have explosive materials concealed in some type of concealment, how does that translate into the available vapor that would be detectable by the product? So going forward, we're doing more work to understand that we call vapor characterization, and that should ultimately translate into a performance standard for industry. The other factor other point I would also touch upon is human factors. When you talk to many of the manufacturers, they do a fantastic job in developing hardware and software, but I think most of us have a full understanding and appreciation that human factors is a core element in the overarching process. How an individual is able to visually inspect an image and be able to make a decision of whether or not those items in the bag actually are a threat or benign. Understanding how individuals trust or don't trust or mistrust automation. Having detection algorithms we've seen actually provides a significant improvement in the overall screening process. But individuals who ultimately lose trust in algorithms because they alarm too often also present some potential negative factors to it. So working through with our human factors, and I think some of the countries have been involved in our international human factors working group. We've had excellent participation across the world, sharing best practices, sharing lessons learned, and actually looking at new ideas and new concepts. And it's been a great, in our opinion, a great collaboration effort working with the international community. Last couple slides here. This is talking about a concept what we call CAT, Credential Authentication Technology. And fundamentally what this technology does is as you present yourself at a US checkpoint, you're able to present an identification. It could be a driver's license, a walker ID, a passport. And through the system, we're able to perform a series of checks to make sure that the actual ID itself is authentic. And that information helps us to be able to validate the individual as actually who they say they are. And then we're incorporating elements of biometrics into the same design. So we can actually look at facial matching or facial recognition, if you will, with individuals who present themselves with the IDs they presented. Now, ideally, of course, there's a match there. So we're running a series of pilots, a number of locations in U.S. airports, and so far it's been very, very productive and very promising. So we're hoping to push that further going forward. E-gates as a whole is somewhat new to the U.S. I know many parts in the world are using e-gates today, but for the U.S. it's definitely an opportunity in working with our airline partners to see where those systems or solutions would work best for our screening process. Canine research and development, and I know a number of countries do leverage canine, others do not. There are a number of research and development efforts that we're looking at canines. Obviously looking closely to understand how you can optimally use canine. In the US, we have two versions. We have what we call passenger screening canines and explosive detection canines. Different approaches, different CONOPS, but fundamentally looking for the same threat material of interest. Understanding canines themselves, they're excellent workers, but we need to understand how we can best train them to support the mission itself. There's a wide variety of explosive materials out there. They have different odors, especially when you combine them with different explosives. How do those odors change or don't change? So we're running through a series of research and development efforts to better understand how we can better implement canines. Also on the training aid side, canine teams themselves have to have that reoccurring experience. Canines have to have a reoccurring exposure to explosive materials. What are the best products out there to be able to support that type of screening? Here's a quick snapshot of some of the next generation technologies we're going to be looking at, specifically TSA in partnership with DHS Science and Technology. From the trace detection side, you'll see a fundamental shift from using what we call IMS technology for the last 30-some years to using what we call mass spectroscopy. And there's a product out there. The first detect system itself is a mass spec system. Fundamentally, it provides you enhanced selectivity as well as a significant reduction in false alarms if the systems prove out the way we think they will. We talked a little bit about the flat panel AIT systems. I think some of you have obviously seen this transition from fixed X-rays to computed tomography or CT systems at the checkpoint. There are alternative CT systems that actually have what we call stationary gantries, which no longer requires that revolving or turning, if you will, of the gantry, which potentially could cause some wear and tear over the years. But yet the stationary gantry will provide you that same level of image quality as well as hopefully that level of performance as well. And then lastly, these are some of the highlights, if you will, of what we're going to be looking at over the next 1 to 3 and 3 to 5 years. Obviously looking at standardization, working with industry to be able to standardize the data that comes off systems and to be able to leverage that information with third-party entities, non-traditional original equipment manufacturers. Looking at other means of what we call discriminators, if I can identify alternative signatures, if you will, of the materials of interest, and then incorporate that into my overarching algorithm that reduces potentially the false alarms and improves overall detection performance for most of our systems. High resolution systems, improved trace detection with mass spec is obviously a next level I think we'll all be at hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years. And then a further development and improvement on what we call biometric screening. I think biometrics is a huge opportunity for those individuals who want to share that information with a screening entity. It can drastically improve the process and ultimately provide better capability and also a better experience for the passenger. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nick. Lots in there. In terms of new technologies and processes that are coming. Next, I'd like to have Monica speak to some of the priorities for the Civil Aviation Authority in China, whichever you'd like. You could sit down or you could stand up there. And talk a little bit about some of the technology enhancements that they're focused on and also some of the process improvements.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you, Nick. That's quite informative, and I think that's the one more thing that I think the beauty of the AVSEC symposium is that in the end, we find that we are facing the same AVSEC world, and we are facing the same challenges and problems. But the much more fun part is that we are considering the same technology, and we're considering maybe the same process and measures, solutions, but we're considering it from different angles. And I learned a lot about from you, and while you are doing the presentation, and I think, oh, this is everything we are considering right now, but you kind of provide a very brand new vision about this. So thank you. I think this is the best part of our communication, our best part of the platform. Yeah, thank you. And so for my part, I think I wish I can have a detailed presentation like all the beautiful, wonderful slides like Nick. But I think next time we will bring our technical team to introduce our technical side about that. But we do have lots of things about the government innovation to talking about from my side. First of all, I think CAC of China, our government, we welcomed all kinds of new technologies to come into our team, to work with us, to work with the AVSEC world. And we encourage all kinds of companies and all kinds of new technologies to get into our industry. And we more than welcome all the technical applications. So we pay much importance about the application of the new technology. And so that's I think it's last month we hold the first AVSEC aviation security technology exhibition in Shenzhen, and I think that idea is very much inspired by our AVSEC symposium. So we have already been here for the third one, and China we hold our first one technology exhibition last month. Just have already found that, and we got more than 500 participants to come to that exhibition, and more than 50 technology companies, small or big, they all come here to exhibit their own technologies and their own products. And we welcome that. And also we bring lots of, almost most of the airports, the airlines, or the potential buyers to get into the same platform. And we also have our government decision makers to come to that exhibition. So everybody in the one platform. For our government decision makers, and that we think that it's really open-minded. It's open-minded to our government decision makers. That's how the technology world have been developed. What is the future of our AVSEC world? And for the industries, for the airlines and the airports, they can really find out, oh, there are so many new tech like facial recognition and AI, new things which can help them to strengthen their security. And for the companies, they will, of course, they will benefit that. They can present their product to all the buyers that can be like that. But that's guided by our government idea. But we welcomed and we introduced the associations and the organizations in China. We get the opportunity, get the platform for them to get every key players to get together. And I think that's great. That's that kind of very great for welcomed from each part of the every industry, every government, and every companies in China. So this is kind of like to connecting the needs to already have the product, and to guidance to the driving the needs for that. And the second one, I want to share two different experience from our side. I was want to ask one question about our audience, and instead I just ask Anne. So if when you travel, when you arrived at the airport and suddenly you find that you lost your ID, you just didn't get that, you forgot to bring your ID, what will happen next time? If you just forgot your ID. You can't find it.
So in the United States, at least, if you're flying domestically and you do not have an ID, most of the time you actually could still get on an aircraft. For an international flight, you would never be allowed to fly.
So how to get the flights, domestic flights, if you didn't get your ID?
So
You forgot to get that.
Usually TSA, and I won't speak for TSA. I'll let you.
Yeah.
No, it's fine. You're doing great. No, we do have alternative procedures that we would follow to ensure that the individual themselves are clear to actually get on the aircraft. But as Anne-Marie mentioned, we do have policies and procedures to be able to employ.
Okay, so how long will it take for that procedures?
Obviously, it depends on the individual, how many items they have with them. I mean, we go through a very thorough process, if you will, to make sure that the individual themselves are cleared.
Of course.
So it
Thank
could
you.
vary.
Thank you. I wasn't into to challenge this. I just want to do a kind of a little research or investigation here. Yes, because we're facing the same problem here. Because every day, I think the number of the 2018 last year, so many Chinese, when they're traveling to the airport, they find that they just didn't get their IDs, and the number is over 2 million. So I don't know, maybe Chinese, they always forgot their IDs. But the number is so big, and all the passengers in China, before last week, they have to go to their airport police. And to airport police, just simply to verify you are yourself. To demonstrate to the police that I am myself, and you have to show all the documentation and other things, and they have to the airport police have to verify that. So that process may take like a half an hour, and it will also take your time to walk to the airport police, because sometimes the airport police is not located in the terminal, and for that things, and we introduce a new policy that we can just get a temporary ID pass from a social media app. And after that, we did a lot of work, of course, and we did a lot of trial, and to ensure security, of course, first. And then we can find that from last Sunday, we have 203 airports to initiate the system at one time, that we can ensure if you didn't bring your ID to your airport, we can get your temporary ID pass within 60 seconds. Yeah, I think that's really facilitate everybody and all the security measures, and we didn't lower any measures, but the passengers really love that, and the airport really welcome that. I have several airports sitting over there; they love that, and this is the second point I want to share. I want to share to you, and the last one is about we also carry on the differentiation of the screening scheme in China. But before we're doing the differentiation of the screening, we do several kinds of research about what do we mean by differentiation of security screenings? It means that the differentiation of the passengers. It means that the differentiation of the equipments. It means that the differentiation of the procedures or different policies, whether you ask them to take off your shoes, something like that. So we did lots of research, and we really learn from the deep learning is about the equipment, but we learn, and we have a team to do research about all the passengers numbers within our 3 of our big airports. And finally, after 1 year, we get the result that we have to focus on the different passengers, different kind of passengers. I'm not taking that. I'm taking the good passengers out of the others, and I take the other ones. It's not good. It's not that time. We're just thinking that maybe the passenger, that kind of passenger, is lower risk. And for that, we even have a greater name for differentiation of screening. We call that easy screen. So how easy can be security screening at the airport can be. It's based on your risk level. If you travel a lot, if you travel, your frequency of your travel is large, and then you have zero negative records, and we can get into that passengers, and we applied the most advanced technology and less intrusion measures, and you can get past through it without taking out everything and without something like hold back. And the efficiency and the fuel of the passengers will be much more improved. And this is something we are doing and trying to do, and we are already something or already have that result and the something of a product. So to sum up, for the government innovation and for the technical innovation, I think China will welcome all kinds of new technique, and we really love all the new technique to apply it into our world, and we really pay much importance to application of the technology, and we always on our own way. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Monica. Lots in there about communication platforms and collaboration with industry, new processes that have been put in place, and of course, the outstanding example with the temporary ID application. So I want to go quickly, Sean, to you to provide an overview of Draeger and what you guys do to kind of set the stage for the rest of our conversation.
Hello, I'm Sean, and in addition to Draeger, we provide gas detection, vapor detection in sensors, tubes, and varying forms of complexity and technologies to detect whatever's out there. In addition to being somewhat of a subject matter expert in that, I've also a bit of a subject matter expert in flying without my ID. I travel about 40 weeks a year for the last 10 years, and one of those times I was that guy. So I was that one, yep. So when it comes to gas detection in this space, typically there is an event or a passive sensor that goes off, and we have a solution for certain gases or vapors using different technologies, whether it's targeted to a specific gas or a family of gas or vapors that would be coming out of the luggage or the item. And then we also have a very targeted glass tube ampule that would be targeting even further down to the specific threat that your initial screening said might be an issue, whether it's alcohol or H2S or something specific. That gas tube or a group of tubes would help you identify and then verify what that is.
So I just want to note to everyone, we would love it if you provide questions that we can use throughout the panel discussion. So if you have some and you could enter them into the app, that would be great. Thank you. Now, I want to turn to Daniel quickly to kind of introduce where you come from within ICAO and kind of how procurement and working with industry works in your branch.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. So I work in the ICAO Technical Cooperation Bureau, which is essentially the project implementation arm of ICAO. I'm guessing most of you here probably don't know about it or know very little about it. So if you'll indulge me for a few minutes, I'll just do a quick overview of what TCB does, and then link it to this particular panel and discussion. I'm excited about something that our illustrious MC, Mr. Chagnon, said opening today when he said that many of the discussions of the past couple of days have centered around the word cooperation, and that's precisely our name, Technical Cooperation Bureau, and I think hopefully I'll be able to show how we can combine government needs with what industry can provide in terms of solutions. So TCB, as we like to refer to ourselves, we provide support to member states of ICAO in the full spectrum of civil aviation, I have to say, so not just aviation security. So I'm just going to go an overview of the type of support that we can provide, and keep in mind that this is not only for security, but really for the whole gamut of civil aviation, so safety, environment, economic policies, and everything essentially. But we provide services in three main components. The first one is through expert consultants. So we have a vast roster of experts in, again, all the fields. And states might come because they have a need, maybe need to update some of their legislation, regulations, some of their operating manuals. Maybe they need some training, so they want some OJT, or just some advice on how to better do things. So we have all these experts, and they're international experts. And the advantage of, or one of the benefits, I'd say, of using these experts is that, they've worked all over. They have a really vast experience. So you're getting to exchange, you're getting to learn what was done in other parts of the world, in other countries, and incorporate what works for you. So I think this harkens a bit to what Monica was saying about using innovative practices with the example of the ID. So you might have these experts traveling who have seen different things, that have learned, and they'll pass this on to you as a state or an airport or a security agency. So this is one thing I want to mention as the first one. The second one I'll mention is also the training. So we also have embedded in the Technical Cooperation Bureau the Global Aviation Training Office of ICAO, the GATT, which has a huge catalog of training packages that's done in collaboration with a network of training centers, the Trainair Plus network that probably some of you are familiar. There's aviation security courses that are offered through those. So again, this is something that is to the benefit of the member states, and we encourage you to look at that catalog and see. And there's a booth just outside, and you can peruse it at your leisure during the breaks. And the final one, I think the one that Anne-Marie is the most interested in, so I left it for last, is the procurement services of TCB. So we offer a full suite, ISO 9001 certified procurement. And it's from beginning to end. So we're talking from definition of needs to development of technical specifications or terms of reference, scope of work, to evaluation, to negotiation with supplier, to the oversight and management of contract until the end of even warranty period. So it's a full support. And the states, or again, airports or security agencies, they can use the whole turnkey option, or as we say, à la carte. And here I want to now kind of link up with what our esteemed keynote speaker, Sonia, mentioned. The challenge that we have in this panel, or I think the states in general, is that you want innovative solutions that possibly will be faster facilitation times, or lower cost, or higher detection, as Dominic was mentioned, or fewer false alarms. This is excellent. But you also need, as Sonia mentioned, immediate effects, right? And they have to be compliant, of course. And this is the other thing with working in TCB. All our projects, the results have to be in compliance with ICAO SARPs. Again, not just in terms of security, but the full 19 annexes. So that's always the challenge. And what we do in our procurement section, again, and with the assistance of the experts that we have at our disposal, is to really have the ideal needs so that when we go for a procurement exercise, that you get the equipment or service that really meets your needs. And we always talk about best value for money, as we're talking about keywords earlier. So in our lingo, that's the key one: is what's best for you. What you can get the biggest bang for your buck, as the typical expression goes, right? So I'll kind of keep it at that, so we can have some time for the panel discussion. But I'll be available after the panel, at the break, so if anyone wants to talk to me more about how TCB can support, again, so whether it's experts, through training, or through our procurement services, I'll be happy to discuss. I'll leave it to you, Anne-Marie, to continue on the panel. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Daniel. Just a quick question for you, actually bouncing the ball back your way. What are some of the key reasons why states come to you for help with these procurements?
So often it'll be they want the best technical know-how, or sometimes they're not sure exactly how best to meet that need. So one of my previous directors, he would often say this: how many radars or ILS or screening equipment that you buy in a given year? Because I buy dozens of those every year. Meaning that we have accumulated a lot of experience. We know the pitfalls of a particular type of equipment or service, and all of this is passed on to the client state when they're procuring through ICAO. So that's a benefit. And again, usually, and this is something I like to mention, for the suppliers, there's really no cost or restriction in registering with the ICAO procurement service. So there's a site, you go, the public site procurement, and you just register, and the tenders are open. So there's, again, no restriction. Any company or potential provider can submit a bid or proposal. And we encourage the more bids, the better, right? And again, through over 65 years of experience in procuring in civil aviation, we've developed really what we consider best practice techniques in procurement. So if I can answer that maybe with an example, I'll go outside aviation, but let's say I would say, hey, I want to buy a car. Actually, I want a red Honda Civic 2019 model with a yellow fuzzy dice on the rear view mirror. Maybe there's one guy who can offer me that car and he's going to jack up the price, right? So that's not a very good specification. So maybe you want to say, well, I need a vehicle, and you're going to put some parameters, what kind of fuel efficiency you want. You're going to say, well, I drive mostly city, so maybe range is important, or speed. Maybe you like to drive in Germany or something. Or maybe you do a lot of off-roading, so then speed's not so important. So now you're going to put your priorities on traction and suspension and these kind of things, right? Or cargo, because you have, twins or something. So you have a lot of stuff to carry, right? But then maybe beyond that, maybe it's not a car that you need. Maybe what you need is actually, I need to get from point A to point B. That's my need. And maybe the car's not even the solution. Maybe they'll say, well, you know what? There's a transportation service. Maybe Uber has the best solution for you. So this is what we're looking for. And I think this is where we're assisting the governments match, or find the best match from the industry to their need. So whether, again, in aviation security, you have an issue with congestion in your airport, and you want to fix that or you want to improve that, that's your need. So maybe that's, how can I decongest? So we'll develop the terms of reference to address that need. And then the industry, we want the best solutions. We want creative solutions. And usually in our procurement process, we always say, this is the parameters, but you are free to offer something better or innovative that can match that need. So I think this is where this discussion, or at least our role, can support in trying to, again, have innovative solutions. So this is excellent. This is certainly something we want, but meeting the needs of the states, and from ICAO perspective, of course, in full compliance with the SARPs.
That's great. Thank you, Daniel. I think it's interesting from an innovation standpoint to open the aperture in terms of requirements and being a little bit more kind of open-minded in terms of what that need might look like. I think on the flip side of that, sometimes in working with governments, when the need is not more clearly defined, sometimes it's hard to develop product to that need, right? And understanding where your R&D dollars should go, which is separate and apart from kind of how you guys operate. But Sean, I'd be interested to kind of hear your views on working with governments to try to develop product and what that looks like from initial conceptual R&D phases up until the time that you're bidding on a solicitation.
Typically, from the industry side, we like to get involved as early as possible. So if there's, say, again, detection, we do detection very well. We have engineers that's their career at Draeger, sometimes just building a better sensor than the last sensor they built, right? So we can bring that to the table when maybe we come into Nick's office someday, right? The problem sometimes comes, well, the best case scenario is Nick goes, okay, you guys have this technology, we've been looking for a solution, let's build that out, here's some R&D funds, so there's very little risk to my boss's 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 boss when they have to make a decision for what we're going to prioritize. Sometimes the issue comes that Nick doesn't have a choice, or the TSA or the customer doesn't have a choice. It's an immediate threat, or it's an immediate need, and we don't have the ability to build that out or build that relationship or build that R&D. And it becomes something that needs to happen very fast, and it puts us on our heels a little bit, rather than leaning forward with the customer or leaning forward with a solution, putting us back on our heels. We want to make sure that whatever we feel doesn't give false alarms, or doesn't give a false sense of security, or doesn't perform, or we didn't perform high humidity tests, because we assumed that the fielding would be into an air-conditioned building, and we didn't perform high humidity tests. So we aren't going through our normal solution set or our normal process for building out a solution that's safe, that's effective, and that's usable, so that Nick can feed that into his, or the TSA can feed that into their security continuum, whatever that might be. And then from there, once we get to procurement, everybody at the table of experts, whether it's industry and government on a requirements level, can agree that this is a good solution. And then we run into, in America, the federal acquisition regulations that say it doesn't matter necessarily if that's the good solution, we have to go through another process. There are some groups within, say, the DoD that are utilizing something different called an Other Transactional Authority, an OTA. NASA also uses OTAs, where it builds in the R&D, and then from the R&D you have specific gates that mirror the FAR, but then at the end of that it's also your procurement method that allows you to say, with multiple companies or partnering companies through a single R&D agreement, that allows you to purchase the end product that's developed with the government at the end. That things like that innovative transactional authority or innovative procurement solution provide a partnership, a real partnership between government and industry that can yield a good solution, rather than we build a solution and then we have to go through the procurement method because there are budgeting shortfalls, long-term budgeting requirements that maybe we get to the point that we've developed something, we've done it very fast, and then there's no money for 5 years. There's 5-year budgeting cycles with typical federal government agencies. There's a 5-year budgeting cycle in the US. Now, again, somebody can find money somewhere that they weren't using for something else, but if it's a large-scale purchase, you're looking at 5 years after you've done the product work. So an innovative solution to actually be a good partner is like an OTA type thing is extremely useful.
That's great, thank you. And I think for a lot of companies, that 5-year window can be the valley of death, right? But I think, having that clear path is a very good example from R&D to procurement and understanding what those gates look like to getting innovative product into the market. So another question that I'd turn to Monica and to Nick from the government standpoint, there are a lot of ways to drive innovation, and some of the questions that we have coming in, which I'll turn to in a minute, thank you, revolve around how can governments really spur more innovation. We've talked about R&D, we've talked about innovative procurement processes, we've talked about collaboration platforms. In your view, Monica, what are you looking at, or what are you prioritizing in terms of how you engage with industry to really drive change and innovation?
And I think during our process, I think that this is the same with TSA and ours. When we're using, finally deciding to get some equipment into our market, we have to have some standard. So, but the standard needs to, based on researchers and based on many trials and the tests. And when we come across like millimeter wave is not like a new technique, but years before when we don't have so many equipment like that, when we have the new kind of new monster over there, and we cannot just decide to get that equipment into our airport because we don't know nothing. We know nothing about the equipment, the ability that. So CAC, as all you know, we are one of the third country, European TSA and CAC. We have our own scheme of standards, but I have to say that the standards have to maybe much high years behind the equipment. So after we can just we can allow all the officially allowed this equipment or the new tech equipment to get into our market, we invite all the new cutting-edge technologies to get into our airport. And if we find that if we're looking at the application in our airport, in our airlines, in our procedures is really helped, and we will launch trials. Believe it or not, we have several, like 5 to 10 new technology trial in our airports. And normally it's in the big airport, but not the biggest airports. So which means that the airports, they have the money. They have the money to trial, to use the most advanced technologies to get into their system. But during this process, they eager for us, our government, to come kind of like a free pass of using the technology, new technology, because new technology means that sometimes you will lower down about your measures of the security. That's the main point, as you get more technology here and you get less layers of security measures, but you also secured our goal. But that kind of during the using this new technology or new equipment, you're actually something like breaking the law, breaking the regulations, because according to the law, you need to take off your shoes, you need to take out everything, so something like that. But if we are really wants to driving them to let them to have their growing room, to get them room to grow, we give the launch the trial process for that, and we give the free pass during our daily inspections about special equipment application, and this is the first one. And the second one, we have kind of a, I don't know, maybe this is the accurate word, is like tolerance, it's like a fault tolerance system. Means that if you are using that, if you are using high technique, if we want to insert incentive or this kind of technology, and if you are using that, and if something happened in your airport, if something during that time, our government to take this responsibility. It's not the airport taking that responsibility. And this is a big leap. So there's some of the trial we're doing right now.
Thank you, Monica. Those are excellent examples. So much appreciated. Do you want to give kind of an overview from TSA?
Sure. When it comes to innovation, it very much spans the gamut. We have different entities within the U.S. government that are spurring, driving innovation. We have organizations that invest what we consider to be high-risk, high-return type of solutions. There's a significant potential the solution will never actually play out, will never achieve its desired purpose, but if in fact it does meet that capability, it could be a significant difference in the way things are being done today. We have groups like DHS Science and Technology. They're driving capability. So it may not be a brand new system, but there may be components of the system that actually do things much different than the way we do it today. And if in fact that's successful, that might be an element that could be integrated into an existing platform, into a new platform. And then we also, of course, with TSA, we have the Innovation Task Force. This is a new and evolving group that's been around for several years. In the past, TSA would employ very specific, we call solicitations. Those solicitations could last anywhere from a year to 2 years to get through the process. Establishing the requirements, working with industry to develop solutions, conducting testing at a facility that does certification testing to the point of actually testing systems in airports. With the Innovation Task Force, it gave us a means to be able to look at new ideas, new technologies, bring them into airports, and actually see how they perform in a real-world airport environment. And for us, and I believe industry as well, it's a very much win-win situation. Industry has the opportunity of getting real-world data, working in the environment that they're hoping to eventually sell their products in, and then for us being able to understand how that may or may not influence where we're going with requirements. For us, establishing requirements, there's always the element of reality. We do what we can to do market research to understand where technologies are. We'll talk to universities. We'll talk to scientists at various associations to understand where the opportunities exist. But at the same time, we can't set industry up to fail, meaning setting requirements too high and not being able to purchase solutions who don't meet those requirements is kind of a bad situation for everyone. We fundamentally believe in incremental development. We believe into spiral development. We develop requirements that hopefully achieve what we need today, but we also establish requirements that will say it's on the horizon. You know, if it's looking for a more difficult threat, dealing with a more complex concealment, the idea is at least it's on the radar, and manufacturers and industry understand where they need to go, and maybe it's not this year, maybe it's not next year, but it could be in 5 years. So it's definitely a partnership, understanding full well manufacturers have limited research and development funds. They have limited research and development resources. As mentioned earlier by Sean, there should be a light at the end of the tunnel that sees potential profit at some point, a long-term relationship with TSA or some other government entity. The goal here is really to work closely with industry where it's possible and when it's possible. In the meantime, you know, government still has requirements we have to meet. We have objectives and expectations that we're trying to achieve, and it's definitely it's an ongoing effort.
Great, thank you, Nick. To move kind of away from practical implementation of new equipment and move more to the policy side, I think we're in a phase these days of what I would call regulatory or regulation fatigue. The community is wary of new requirements that will come out to buy new equipment. Many feel like they've already deployed new and higher grade capabilities recently, and they don't want to replace those technologies. So I think a shift that we've seen in the last couple of years, especially in Europe, is moving from a stick approach of this shall you do to a incentive-based policy approach where you're building in a business case in how the requirements are written. So an example of that would be the deployment of CT technology in Europe, whereby if you have a CT system that's plugged into a European airport, passengers can leave their laptops and their liquids in the bag, which drives higher throughput, which creates a very compelling business case for European airports. So I think we're seeing the shift there. The other kind of category is where there potentially is no business case, there is no requirement, but it actually is better for security. Those are the folks I like to call the evangelists, and they have a hard job, so they have to go out in the community and say, this will make your security system more robust, and you should think about implementing this kind of capability because it's good for mitigating risk. I think that's exceptionally hard to do, and so I guess a question that I would turn back to you guys to think about and to respond to is, you know, how do you look at bringing those new products to market that are actually better for security, but don't necessarily, there's no requirement behind them? And then how do governments think about, okay, there are technologies like walk-through systems on the market today that aren't necessarily required. How do you continue from a policy perspective to support them?
When it comes to building a new product, a lot of times it's being tied in with science and technology. So there isn't necessarily a requirement yet, or there isn't necessarily a regulation that we're responding to or the TSA is responding to. It's sometimes being on the ground with inspectors and them saying or hearing from trainers or science and technology people that we're working on other projects with, this is something that, you know, we wish there's a gap here, right? There's something here that we're not seeing, and letting someone like me or our trainers or our subject matter experts interact with S&T folks, your S&T folks, can sometimes yield a synergy that you don't have to sometimes have to pay for. You don't have to put R&D funds to. One of the shining examples that we worked on was an oxygen sensor. We do oxygen sensors, and our engineers really liked working with NASA's engineers on the space station. So we built an oxygen sensor for the space station because there was just a synergy there. Sometimes we build products for customers or tailor a development of a product for a customer that's already in its development cycle to a specific need. Maybe we can increase the humidity on a specific capability or withstand temperatures, or maybe it was designed to be used 8 hours a day and we want to test it to be running 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, constantly on, that we can then come back to S&T, TSA or DHS, S&T, and say, here's something we think that we can do, and then we've done it, and then we can come to TSA and say, this is something that's now a commercial off-the-shelf product that is available to you, that we've done before, and I think that synergy begins, that effort begins with an openness at an S&T level to share that gap, not being afraid to talk about what's missing in your current group, because we'll have the same thing. We can say, this is something that we don't currently do, but we think we could do better with a little bit of effort. It's not a major R&D undertaking. And
So that's enormously helpful. Thank you, Sean. So kind of thinking through the evangelists who are out there trying to sell their capabilities and trying to push their technologies forward, even though there's no requirement, and kind of coordinating for that gap. You have folks who are sitting in governments who have enormous bureaucracy around them. I used to be one of them. I understand that bureaucracy. And are really trying to kind of drive change, but there are formal processes and procedures in place, and sometimes these take a very long time to drive change. So I guess one of the things that I would turn to Monica, Nick, and Daniel as well and ask is kind of what are the key challenges for you in moving quickly on things inside of governments or international organizations, and what are some of the efforts underway to kind of cut through those timelines and make things a little bit more streamlined or faster?
Thank you. So, it's interesting over the last 15 years in aviation and watching us transition, if you will, from primarily using walk-through metal detectors to using, yet again, body scanners, security scanners, advanced imaging technology. As you mentioned, Anne-Marie, the transition, if you will, from the traditional fixed X-ray system to CT technologies, you're seeing bits and pieces of innovation. The credential authentication technology, which is something fairly new, and TSA is aggressively rolling that solution technology out, and we're seeing huge differences in performance by doing so. I think the goal here is obviously there are many ideas and there's many solutions, and sifting through all those ideas and solutions, to your point, to say this is a diamond in the rough that ultimately will change the way we do business. It will address what we think are significant gaps. This will change the experience of the passenger in such a way that there'll be I wouldn't say pleasure, but more a relaxed experience going through the screening process is always on our minds. As you highlighted very well, within government, especially in the U.S. government, we have strict regulations that have to be followed in setting requirements and doing the necessary investment analysis before we make any significant investments. The Innovation Task Force, as I mentioned earlier, has changed that somewhat. We are seeing new solutions that are coming to U.S. airports more quickly. We're seeing that change in the paradigm of what way we have screened, at least for the last 5 to 10 years, and we're seeing benefit. And I think it's going to continue to grow that way. How that ultimately translates into a large procurement where we're potentially buying hundreds, if not thousands, of technologies, that's a more in-depth process at the end of the day. But I think for manufacturers, getting that experience and then being able to market that to other customers throughout the world to say, listen, we're testing this technology in this airport, and this airport, and this airport, and this is the feedback we're getting from the regulator, this feedback from the customers, or even the airport, is all value added to help those manufacturers market those new ideas and new solutions. It's definitely a process, and I fully appreciate the idea to quickly turn on new ideas, new concepts can be difficult. But I think at least the intent of the U.S., or at least TSA, is that we're still open to these ideas, and we still want to push for those ideas. And where it makes sense, we're going to continue to drive those solutions, and we will transition to those new ideas where it actually fits in the system, and we see the value added. So at least from our side, I think there's a lot of opportunity. We don't want to quell innovation by any means, and I think, as you mentioned, there are many good ideas and many ideas that may or may not fit in aviation. There may be other perfect applications outside of aviation where those solutions may be a better fit. So it's definitely it's a trade-off, and it's a very diverse scenario, if you will, to really identify those solutions that will change and make a difference.
Thank you. I think for the bureaucracy, I think the same will feel the same way. But the one thing that I want to mention that the same with Nick, maybe years before we stick on the conventional equipment for a long time. That is because that we didn't get enough information before years before, because of we didn't as we were always sitting in our office. We can't know the needs. You see that gap. You identify the gap between identify a gap, and sometimes the inspectors can see. And sometimes we mentioned earlier yesterday that the screeners can see what the best need, what kind of the technology they need. But officers from CAC, sometimes we don't see that. But fortunately, these years we open that. We have platforms. We have so many things, and all the information comes arrive to us. They just come to us, so we can welcome to when we see a lot. So this one information is solving gradually, and I think we're kind of solving these things already done that, because we opened that the information is equal between the technical work and the security and the government work. And the other things I think we're talking about the bureaucracy is the main problem is the responsibility is too big for the government, because we have to ensure all these passengers to travel secure, and the terrorist threat is so serious now. So because we stick on the conventional things, and we even something we try to rely on the pat-down system. I think some of them we think that maybe this is a conventional old-fashioned way, but maybe it's the most effective, not effective, is useful way. It's actually you touch down people, you can just make sure that they didn't carry on anything. So as technology is maybe sometimes we cannot just rush into the new technologies to get all this equipment to get into our market. It's just because we're not so confident about the equipment. So if we together with the industry, with the manufacturers, we have enough resources, we have enough trial data, you have enough evidence to show us this equipment is really secure and it's really good, I think we can cut down all these bureaucracies. Yeah.
Well, one part of the answer, I think, is obviously these kind of fora, where we're inviting governments, airports, security agencies, and of course industry to exchange and discuss and debate on what are possible good solutions. If I can quote one of our experts in aviation security, he'll say, in aviation safety, your enemy is gravity, mostly, and maybe obstacles like mountains and buildings, sometimes animals as well. But in aviation security, your adversary is another human who is equally coming up with innovative ideas to bypass your security measures. So you always have to be constantly, innovating and coming up with, more effective or better solutions. Now, from let's say a TCB project perspective or a procurement perspective, I kind of want to just echo what my two colleagues just said here, and the main focus really has to be on your planning phase in the beginning and your definition of your requirements and your needs. Dominic mentioned just sometimes some technologies, they're just not applicable for aviation, so there's no need to procure it. So that's what the advice that we always give is, like, take the time to really look into what is the issue that you have, what is your need, what is your forecast moving forward, what is your expected travel, your cargo, your passenger movements, so that when you go through that exercise, you're getting really the best solution, the best value for money, as we often say. So I think that would be basically my 2 cents on that, and I think it sort of echoes what 2 colleagues here have said. So thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. So we do not have airlines or airports on our panel today, but we do have an excellent question from the audience. It says, airlines and airports are very interested in innovative methods to security and benefit of self-service or a better passenger experience, but are hindered by prescriptive regulations? Should governments shift to a more outcome-based system to allow for adoption of new technology? And if so, how? So I think this is actually a very valid point. I think the point is that operators in airports have a hard time being innovative in terms of their processes, potentially, or even the types of technologies that they could use, based on a rule book that is very lengthy and very thorough in terms of how they should operate. So has thought been given from the government angle in terms of kind of how to open that aperture again and how to move more towards an outcomes-focused approach?
Sure. Interesting, the concept of outcome-based security has probably been talked about for 20 years. Some will argue that the process is overly prescriptive, trying to detail every capability and see how that specific capability performs against a very specific given task is definitely an approach that you see most often. But fundamentally, it's a system. And all the different parts and pieces of the system ideally work together and you get an ideal outcome. And how you measure that outcome, there are a series of events that you can do through red team testing and running through drills and trying to see where the gaps are and to identify where your potential weakest links are to ultimately raise that outcome bar, if you will. I think the idea of pushing innovation but understanding the outcome is a huge opportunity. And I think, the idea, and I think it was a great presentation from our colleagues in the Brits several years ago, of putting a specific score or probability of detection and a probability of performance of false alarm or whatever parameters you want to use to measure the system and let industry do what industry does well, which is innovate. Have them establish the relationships with all the entities along the nodes, if you will, to achieve a certain outcome. And I think that idea is still being looked at and still being fleshed out. But as you mentioned, there may be elements of the process that you can step back and say, okay, our objective is X, and our goal is to achieve whatever that level of measure of effectiveness and efficiency it may be, and really rely on industry to do what they do best. There are many great ideas, there's many great solutions out there, and it becomes challenging, and I can imagine even frustrating for industry to constantly being hindered to explore or even trial those ideas. So I think government is open to those concepts. We have to understand there's still a level of responsibility and regulation that's required, but how do you come to that balance, if you will, and giving industry that means to push new ideas, new concepts, and industry feeling confident and satisfied, I know the system works, I know it's performing the way it is, I know it's not going to be worse than what I'm doing now. So I think there are huge opportunities, but it becomes with a level of trust and cooperation and collaboration, and I think there's openness, I think, on both sides. It's just working through the details, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. I think I just echo Nick because I come across all these questions all the time because airlines, airports, they want to employ some of a kind of a new technical equipment in their airport, and they come to ask me that, can I do this? And instead of doing the conventional way of the security measures. So from now on, up to now on, and I have to say that we have to depend on different situations, because some of them that I can allow you to do that kind of a second layer of that to do the trial, but some of that maybe after the research, and we can just give you that free pass. We come across that a lot. Actually, we came across some of the airports, maybe like Shanghai Airport and the other big airport in China. They want to use the edge technology, and they say that we cannot get off. We don't need to get off the car instead of getting through the gate, and we apply that new technology. We don't need to, the human being, the person don't need to get out the vehicle, and that new technology can just scan everything. And about this, and I think that you can try to do this, but our inspectors will do much more inspecting work during this trial. So we ensure that government take some of the responsibilities about this. Instead of changing the policy, I think the policy and regulation laws are really hard to change. But we give some kind of, I just say that the fault tolerance or some kind of their distribution of the power and free pass of some point of the security measures. So I think it depends to say, but we work close with the airports and airlines all the time. We welcome that.
So I think that we're about out of time, but I just wanted to kind of wrap up the discussion with any closing remarks that any of you might have. And I think that I would encourage you, if you have something to relay to the audience about your views on how we collectively as a community can drive innovation forward, that would be fantastic. If we could do it quickly, because we're running behind, that'd be great.
I'll just speak as a passenger that flies frequently. I welcome it. I'm looking forward to this walkthrough where I don't have to remove my shoes anymore or remove liquids from my bag or laptop. So I definitely encourage it. I'll keep my comment on that. Thanks.
Well, thanks for having me. My biggest thing would be to keep information flowing about requirements at an S&T level.
And one thing about that is to sharing all the standards, mutual recognition or multiple recognition with the equipment. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I just want to reiterate, global aviation security is a global problem, and we have to make sure the solution works for all of us. At the end of the day, the intent is to make sure that we have the right level of security for all flights and for the individuals who are flying on those aircraft. So absolutely, as a community, I think working together and driving industry to support what we need them to do, for them to do for us, I think we'll have significant payback. So I think it's, once again, speaking from one voice.
Great, thank you very much. And I guess my message would be, understand the problem you're trying to solve. Thank you to everyone for listening to us today and for participating. It's been great being here, and I appreciate all of the panelists taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie, and the panel for setting the stage, providing the government perspective on innovation, and laying the groundwork for the discussion right after the coffee break with the airline industry, and then this afternoon with the airport sector. I'd like you to stay behind for the group photo and a small gift, of course. And perhaps there was a question, if I saw correctly on the screen, about a TCB procurement, an example. So maybe it's an opportunity to promote the TCB booth right at the end of the hall. And perhaps, Danielle, I'm sure you'll be there waiting with open arms to answer any and all questions about TCB. And a coffee, yes. Coffee break is...